The smell of tobacco spit and dried mud clung to everything inside the train cars. But Katherine Keller had learned long ago that complaining never made the work go faster. She pushed her bucket of soapy water down the narrow aisle of the passenger car, her knees aching from hours of scrubbing floors on the Bismarck to Fargo line in the late summer of 1882. The railroad company paid her $3 a week to clean the cars after the last run came in at 9:30 each night. And though the money barely kept her fed, it was honest work in a town where honest work for women meant either cleaning, cooking, or something far worse. Katherine was 21 years old and had been orphaned at 16 when her parents died of scarlet fever within days of each other. She had no siblings, no aunts or uncles willing to take her in, and no prospects for marriage in a territory where men outnumbered women but still seemed to look right through her. She was plain, she supposed, with brown hair she kept tied back in a severe bun, and a face that showed every hardship she had endured. Her hands were red and chapped, her dresses faded and patched, and she moved through Bismarck like a ghost, invisible to everyone except the station master who paid her wages and scolded her if she missed a single spot on the leather seats. She was wringing out her rag into the bucket when she heard footsteps on the platform outside. Through the window, she could see a figure standing beneath the oil lamp, hat pulled low, shoulders broad beneath a dusty brown coat. He had been there the past 3 nights, always appearing around 10 o'clock when she was finishing the first car, always staying until she gathered her things to walk home. She had noticed him but tried not to think about it. Men who lingered in train stations at night were usually trouble. Katherine finished the last row of seats and hauled her bucket toward the door, her back protesting with each step. She was tired in a way that went deeper than muscles and bones, tired in her very soul, but she forced herself to stand straight as she stepped down onto the platform. The man was still there, leaning against a post, and as she passed him, he pushed off and fell into step beside her. "Let me walk you home," he said. His voice was deeper than she expected, rough around the edges like he did not use it much. Katherine kept walking, her bucket handle cutting into her palm. "I do not need an escort," she said. "I did not say you needed one. I am offering." She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. He was tall, probably close to 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that might have been handsome if it were not so weathered. His eyes were blue, startlingly so in the lamplight, and they held a steadiness that made her uncomfortable in a way she could not quite name. "I walk alone every night," Katherine said. "Have for 5 years now." "I know," he replied. "Seems like that should change." She stopped walking and turned to face him fully, setting her bucket down with more force than necessary. "You have been watching me." "I have been noticing you," he corrected. "There is a difference. Not much of one from where I stand." He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "My name is Daniel Owens. I work cattle for the 3 Rivers Ranch about 10 miles west of here. I come into town every few days to pick up supplies, check on business matters, things like that. I have seen you cleaning those train cars for the past month, and I have seen you walking home alone down streets that are not safe for anyone after dark, let alone a woman by herself." Katherine crossed her arms. "And what exactly do you want in return for this chivalrous service you are offering?" Something flickered in his eyes, hurt maybe, though she could not imagine why. "Nothing. I want nothing in return. Every man wants something, not this one." They stared at each other for a long moment, the night air cooling around them. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and from one of the saloons 2 streets over came the tinny sound of a piano and drunken laughter. Katherine knew she should just pick up her bucket and leave, but something held her in place. Maybe it was the sincerity in his voice, Or maybe it was just the bone-deep weariness that made her want, just once, to accept help when it was offered. "I live on the north side," she said finally. "Near the blacksmith shop." "I know," Daniel said, then quickly added, "I have seen you heading that direction." Katherine picked up her bucket and started walking again. Daniel stayed beside her, his strides longer than hers but adjusted to match her pace. They did not speak as they made their way through the quiet streets of Bismarck, past darkened storefronts and houses with yellow lamplight glowing in the windows. The town was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, and Katherine wondered what people would say when they saw her walking with Daniel Owens. Then again, no one ever paid much attention to her anyway. When they reached the narrow boarding house where she rented a room on the second floor, Katherine stopped and set down her bucket. "This is it," she said. Daniel nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "Good night, then." She expected him to say something else, to press his advantage or ask to see her again, but he simply turned and walked back the way they had come. Katherine watched him go, confused and a little annoyed at herself for feeling disappointed. She grabbed her bucket and climbed the stairs to her room, where she washed her face in the basin and fell into bed without bothering to undress fully. The next night, he was waiting again. Katherine saw him as soon as she stepped onto the platform with her cleaning supplies. He was in the same spot, leaning against the same post, and when she emerged an hour later with her bucket and aching back, he straightened and said the same words. "Let me walk you home." This time she did not argue. They walked in silence again, and again he left her at her door without asking for anything. The night after that, he was there once more, and the night after that. By the end of the week, Katherine had stopped being annoyed and started being curious. "Why do you do this?" she asked on the seventh night as they walked past the general store. "Do what? Come all the way into town just to walk me home? You said you work at a ranch 10 miles from here. That is a long ride for no reason." Daniel was quiet for a moment, his boots scuffing against the packed dirt of the street. "Maybe I have a reason," he said. "Which is?" "Maybe I like your company." Katherine laughed, a short, bitter sound. "We barely speak." "I know, I like that too." She did not know what to say to that, so they finished the walk in their customary silence. But the next night, when he was waiting as usual, Katherine found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "You have family at the ranch?" she asked. "No family," Daniel said as they started walking. "I am a ranch hand, not the owner. I have a small cabin on the property, a horse, and not much else. No wife waiting for you, no wife. No children. No prospects really, considering the life I lead." Katherine digested this. "How old are you?" 28. "You?" 21. He nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. They reached her boarding house, and this time before he could leave, Katherine spoke again. "I have coffee," she said, then immediately regretted it. What was she thinking, inviting a man to her room? But Daniel just shook his head gently. "That would not be proper," he said. "But thank you for offering." He left, and Katherine climbed the stairs feeling foolish and strangely moved at the same time. The pattern continued for another week. Every night, Daniel was waiting. Every night, he walked her home. They began to talk more, small exchanges about the weather or the railroad or the growth of Bismarck, from a frontier outpost to something resembling a real town. Katherine learned that Daniel had come from Missouri after the war, though he did not say which side he had fought on, and she did not ask. He had worked cattle drives, guarded stagecoaches, tried his hand at prospecting, and finally settled into ranch work because he was tired of moving. "I like the rhythm of it," he said one night as they walked beneath a sky so full of stars it looked like spilled sugar. "Up before dawn, work the cattle, mend fences, train horses. Same thing every day mostly. I know that probably sounds dull to some people, but to me it sounds like peace." "It does not sound dull," Katherine said softly. "It sounds wonderful." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her heart speed up. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you want?" No one had ever asked her that before. Katherine had spent 5 years surviving, not wanting. She opened her mouth and then closed it again, unsure how to answer. "I do not know," she finally admitted. "That is all right," Daniel said. "You have time to figure it out." But Katherine was not sure that was true. She was 21 years old, alone in the world, with nothing but a rented room and a job scrubbing train cars. Time felt like something that was running out rather than stretching ahead. 3 weeks into their nightly walks, something changed. Katherine finished cleaning earlier than usual and stepped onto the platform to find Daniel already there. But this time he was not alone. 3 men were with him, ranch hands by the look of them, drunk and looking for entertainment. One of them was talking loudly about a card game, another was swaying on his feet, and the third noticed Katherine immediately. "Well now," he said, his words slurred. "Who is this pretty thing?" Daniel stepped between them instantly. "Leave her be, Curtis. You've been holding out on us, Owens. You got a sweetheart you have not mentioned. Go sleep it off," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous in a way Katherine had never heard before. Curtis laughed and tried to step around Daniel, but Daniel's hand shot out and gripped his shoulder hard enough to make the other man wince. "I said leave her be." For a moment Katherine thought there would be a fight, but then Curtis raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, we are going. No need to get territorial." The 3 men stumbled off down the platform, laughing and shoving each other. Daniel watched them go, his jaw tight, and then turned to Katherine with an apology already forming on his lips. "I am sorry about that. They are good men when they are sober, but they had a long week and too much whiskey." Katherine was shaking, though she was not entirely sure why. Men had said worse things to her before, had looked at her with far less kindness than Curtis had shown. But something about the casual way they had dismissed her, the way Daniel had stepped in without hesitation, made her feel vulnerable and protected all at once. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You do not need to thank me." "Yes, I do." They walked in silence for a while, but it was a different kind of silence than usual, charged with something Katherine could not name. When they reached her boarding house, she turned to face him and found him already looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Why do you really do this?" she asked. "And do not tell me it is just because you like my company." Daniel took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as him buying time to think. "Because from the first night, I saw you, struggling with that bucket and looking so tired you could barely stand. I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met. Because you show up every single night and do hard work without complaint. Because when you walk down these streets, you hold your head up like you have nothing to be ashamed of, even though I can see in your eyes that this town has not been kind to you. Because I wake up every morning thinking about whether it is a day I can justify coming into town, just so I can be there when you finish work." Katherine stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Daniel, I am not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know I am just a ranch hand with nothing to offer. I know you probably have dreams that do not include someone like me. But I needed you to know just once that you are seen, that you matter, that you are not invisible, no matter what this town has made you feel." She did not make a conscious decision to move. One moment she was standing 2 feet away from him, and the next she had closed the distance and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. She felt him go rigid with surprise, and then his arms came around her carefully, like she was something precious that might break. They stood that way for a long moment, her breathing in the scent of him, dust and leather and something else that was just Daniel, him holding her like he had wanted to for weeks, but had not dared. When Katherine finally pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks, and Daniel wiped them away with rough, gentle thumbs. "I see you two," she whispered. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face into something beautiful, and Katherine felt something shift inside her chest, like a door she had kept locked for years was finally swinging open. The next night and the night after that and the night after that, Daniel was waiting. But now when they walked closer, their hands occasionally brushing. They talked more, sharing pieces of their pasts like gifts. Katherine told him about her parents, about the scholarship she had almost earned to a teaching college before they died, and she had to drop everything to survive. Daniel told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about losing his parents to a cholera outbreak, about fighting in a war he did not believe in because everyone else was going, and it seemed like the thing to do. "I have spent most of my life just drifting," he said one night. "Going wherever the work was, never putting down roots. I told myself it was freedom, but really it was just fear. Fear of caring about something and losing it." "What changed?" Katherine asked. "I met a woman who cleans train cars and made me want to stop drifting." They had been walking together for 6 weeks when Daniel finally kissed her. It was late September, and the air had turned crisp with the promise of the brutal North Dakota winter to come. They had stopped in front of her boarding house as usual, but instead of saying good night, Daniel reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear that had come loose from her bun. "Katherine," he said softly. She looked up at him, this man who had shown up night after night with no expectation of anything in return, who had listened to her and protected her and made her feel like she was worth something, and she knew what was coming. She wanted it more than she had ever wanted anything. "Yes," she said, answering the question he had not yet asked. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle and questioning, and Katherine answered by rising on her toes and kissing him back with 5 years of loneliness and longing poured into it. His arms came around her, strong and steady, and she felt safe in a way she had not since before her parents died. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Daniel rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I am in love with you," he said. "I probably have been since that first night." "I love you too," Katherine replied, and saying the words out loud felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. Everything changed after that, and yet nothing changed at all. Daniel still waited for her every night. They still walked the same route to her boarding house. But now they walked hand in hand, and now they stopped in the shadows between street lamps to steal kisses, and now they made plans. "Come out to the ranch on Sunday," Daniel said. "It is my day off. I want to show you where I live, introduce you properly to my horse. His name is Copper, and he is going to love you." Katherine had not left Bismarck in 5 years, had not had a reason to, but she found herself nodding eagerly. "I would like that." Sunday dawned clear and cold. Katherine put on her best dress, which was not saying much, and met Daniel at the livery stable where he boarded Copper when he stayed overnight in town. The horse was a big chestnut gelding with a white blaze and kind eyes, and he nuzzled Katherine's hand immediately when she offered it. "See," Daniel said, grinning. "I told you." He helped her up into the saddle and then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. They rode west out of town, past the last scattered houses and into open prairie that rolled away in every direction like a golden ocean. Katherine had forgotten how big the sky could be out here, how it felt to have nothing between you and the horizon. The Three Rivers Ranch was larger than she had expected, with a sprawling main house, several outbuildings, corrals full of cattle, and a handful of small cabins for the ranch hands scattered around the property. Daniel's cabin was at the far edge, a simple one-room structure with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and not much else. "It is not much," he said as he helped her down from copper. "It is yours," Katherine said. "That makes it something." He smiled at that and led her inside. It was clean and sparse, everything in its place, the mark of a man who had learned to live with very little. There was a book on the table, something about horse training, and a few clothes hanging on pegs by the door. The bed was neatly made, and through the single window, Katherine could see miles of open land. "I like it," she said, and meant it. They spent the afternoon walking the property, Daniel pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the ranch and the men who worked it. He introduced her to the foreman, a grizzled man named Pete who looked her up and down and then nodded approvingly at Daniel. "About time you found someone," Pete said. "Was starting to think you were going to live like a hermit forever." By the time Daniel rode Katherine back to town that evening, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink, and she felt happier than she had in years. When he helped her down in front of her boarding house, she caught his hand before he could pull away. "Thank you for today," she said. "Thank you for coming out," he replied. "It meant a lot to me having you there." "Daniel," she said, gathering her courage, "what are we doing? I mean, where is this going?" He looked at her seriously. "Where do you want it to go?" "I want." She took a breath. "I want a life with you. A real life. I want to wake up next to you and go to sleep beside you and build something that is ours." "Then that is what we will do," Daniel said simply. "Marry me, Katherine." It was not the most romantic proposal, standing in the dusty street outside her shabby boarding house, but Katherine did not care. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 3 weeks later by the circuit preacher who came through Bismarck once a month. The ceremony was brief and simple, held in the small church on the edge of town with Pete and his wife as witnesses. Katherine wore the same dress she had worn to the ranch, and Daniel wore his cleanest shirt and a string tie Pete loaned him. They exchanged vows in front of a cross made from prairie wood, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Daniel kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Katherine quit her job cleaning the train cars that very night. The station master was disgruntled, but found a replacement by the end of the week. She packed her few belongings, said goodbye to the landlady who had barely spoken to her in 5 years, and rode out to the Three Rivers Ranch with her husband, a word she could barely believe applied to her. Life as a ranch wife was harder than anything Katherine had done before, but it was also infinitely better. She learned to cook on the temperamental wood stove in their cabin, learned to mend clothes and tend a small vegetable garden and help with the ranch work when extra hands were needed. Daniel taught her to ride properly, and she discovered she loved the freedom of galloping across the prairie with the wind in her hair and nothing but sky above. The cabin that had seemed so sparse when she first saw it slowly became a home. Katherine sewed curtains from fabric she bought in town, made a rag rug for the floor, planted wildflowers around the door in the spring. Daniel built her a bookshelf and started bringing home books whenever he went into Bismarck, novels and poetry and histories that Katherine devoured by lamplight in the evenings. They were happy in a quiet, profound way. Daniel was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He brought her coffee in bed on cold mornings, left wildflowers on the table when he found them on his rides, held her at night like he was afraid she might disappear. Katherine learned to read his moods, learned when he needed silence and when he needed her to talk, learned that the man everyone thought was so serious was actually quite funny in his own dry way. The first winter was brutal. North Dakota winters always were, but that year was worse than most, with blizzards that lasted for days and temperatures that dropped so low the cattle froze standing up. Katherine and Daniel huddled together in their cabin, burning through their wood supply and rationing their food, waiting for the storms to pass. It was during one of those long, dark nights, with the wind howling outside and snow piling against the walls, that Katherine told him she was pregnant. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable in the firelight. Then he pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe and said, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me this." Their son was born the following August, red-faced and squalling and perfect. They named him Samuel, after Daniel's father, and he had Katherine's brown hair and Daniel's blue eyes. Daniel held him with the same careful reverence he had held Katherine that first night she hugged him, like he could not quite believe this tiny person was real. Becoming parents changed them in ways both expected and surprising. Daniel, who had been so careful and controlled, became almost silly around Samuel, making faces and funny noises to make the baby laugh. Katherine, who had spent so long just surviving, discovered depths of love and protectiveness she had not known she possessed. Their cabin felt smaller with 3 of them, but also warmer, more alive. When Samuel was 6 months old, Pete offered Daniel a promotion to assistant foreman. It came with a raise in pay and a bigger cabin, one with 2 rooms and a real kitchen. They moved in the spring, and Katherine cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by how far she had come from that lonely girl scrubbing train cars. Years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Samuel learned to walk, to talk, to ride a horse before he could barely reach the stirrups. Katherine had a daughter next, Emma, who had her father's quiet determination and her mother's stubborn streak. Then another son, Thomas, who was all mischief and laughter from the day he was born. The ranch prospered, and so did Daniel. When Pete retired, Daniel became foreman, and with that came an even bigger house, a real ranch house with multiple bedrooms and a parlor and a dining room where Katherine hosted dinners for the other ranch families. She learned to be a leader among the ranch wives, organizing quilting bees and harvest celebrations and Christmas parties. But no matter how busy life became, Daniel never forgot their beginning. Every year on the anniversary of the night he first walked her home, he would wait for her by the barn after dinner, offer his arm and say, "Let me walk you home." And every year, Katherine would take his arm and let him lead her around the property, past the corrals and the bunkhouse and the main house, all the way back to their front door. It was a ritual, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. On their 10th anniversary, after Daniel had walked her home and the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Katherine leaned against his shoulder, content and tired and happy. "You ever miss it?" Daniel asked quietly. "Your life before, the independence, the solitude." Katherine thought about that girl who had scrubbed train cars every night, who had been so alone she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. "Not for a single second," she said. "Do you miss drifting?" "Not even a little bit." He kissed the top of her head. "You gave me a home, Katherine, a real home, not just a place but a reason to stay in one spot." "You gave me that too," she said. "You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Somewhere in the house, one of the children laughed in their sleep. A horse nickered in the barn. The prairie wind carried the scent of grass and wildflowers. "I was thinking," Daniel said after a while, "maybe it is time to expand the herd. Pete left me some money in his will, and with what we have saved, We might be able to buy that parcel of land to the south, make this place really ours." Katherine sat up to look at him. Our own ranch," he confirmed, "if that is something you want." She kissed him, long and sweet and full of promise. "I want everything with you." They bought the land that winter, 200 acres that bordered the Three Rivers property. The ranch owner was happy to sell it to his most trusted foreman, and Daniel and Katherine spent their savings and all of Pete's inheritance to make it happen. They built a new house on a hill overlooking a creek, bigger than anything Katherine had ever dreamed of living in, with a wrap-around porch and 5 bedrooms and windows that let in the sun. The children helped with the move. Samuel, now 12 and strong enough to carry boxes, Emma, 9 and bossy about where everything should go, Thomas, 7, and more interested in exploring the new property than helping. They named it the Owens Ranch, and Katherine painted a sign for the front gate herself. Running their own ranch was harder than working for someone else, but it was also more rewarding. Daniel hired on 3 ranch hands, young men who reminded Katherine of him when they first met, hungry for steady work and a place to belong. She made sure they were well fed and their quarters were comfortable, remembering what it had been like to have nothing. Their ranch grew slowly but steadily. Daniel had a good eye for cattle and an even better one for horses, and the Owens Ranch became known for breeding quality stock. Katherine kept the books, managed the household, and somehow found time to teach Emma to read and cook, and all the things a young woman needed to know in frontier North Dakota. When Samuel turned 18, he announced he wanted to go east to agricultural college to learn modern farming and ranching techniques. Katherine's first instinct was to protest, to keep him close, but Daniel just clasped his son's shoulder and said he was proud of him. They scraped together the money for tuition, and Samuel left on the train to Minneapolis that fall. Katherine cried watching him go, remembering all those nights she had cleaned those train cars, never imagining that someday her own son would ride them toward a future she had helped make possible. Emma grew into a beautiful young woman, with suitors appearing regularly at their door. She was picky, though, turning down proposal after proposal, insisting she wanted what her parents had. "I want someone who sees me," she told Katherine one evening while they washed dishes. "The way Papa always saw you." "You will find him," Katherine assured her, "or he will find you. These things have a way of working out." Emma met her future husband the following spring, a veterinarian who came to the ranch to tend to a sick horse. His name was Robert, and he was patient and kind and looked at Emma like she hung the moon. They were married in the parlor of the ranch house, with half of Bismarck in attendance, and when Daniel walked Emma down the makeshift aisle, Katherine cried happy tears into her handkerchief. Thomas, their baby, stayed close to home. He loved the ranch with a fierceness that rivaled his father's, and there was never any question that he would take over the operation someday. He married a neighboring rancher's daughter, a practical woman named Margaret who could rope a steer and birth a calf with equal competence, and they built a house on the far side of the Owens property. Samuel returned from college full of ideas about crop rotation and cattle breeding, and he and Daniel spent hours discussing how to implement them. He married a school teacher he met in Minneapolis and brought her home to North Dakota, where she opened a school in Bismarck and taught the children of ranchers and railroad workers alike. The years turned into decades. Katherine's hair went gray, and Daniel's face became even more weathered, lined with the marks of a life spent outdoors. But they were healthy and happy, surrounded by children and grandchildren, watching their ranch thrive. On their 30th anniversary, Daniel walked Katherine home as he did every year, but this time they walked out to the spot where their original cabin had stood. It was gone now, torn down to make room for a larger barn, but they both remembered exactly where it had been. "I think about that first night a lot," Daniel said, holding her hand in his. "How close I came to not talking to you. I stood there for 20 minutes trying to work up the courage, telling myself you would just tell me to leave you alone." "I almost did," Katherine admitted. "I was so used to being invisible that I did not trust it when someone finally saw me. I am glad I was stubborn. I am glad I was desperate enough for company that I let you walk me home." He laughed, and she laughed with him, and they stood together in the spot where their life had truly begun, grateful for every stubborn, desperate, wonderful moment that had led them here. When they walked back to the house, their grandchildren were waiting on the porch, a whole gaggle of them ranging from toddlers to teenagers. They ran to greet their grandparents, and Katherine gathered as many of them into her arms as she could reach, breathing in the smell of sun and youth and possibility. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Katherine and Daniel sat together in their bedroom, the same room they had shared for 20 years. Through the window, they could see the prairie stretching away under a full moon, silver and beautiful. "You think you ever get used to it?" Katherine asked softly. "Being this happy, I do not know," Daniel said, pulling her close. "But I am willing to spend the rest of my life finding out." "Me too." They fell asleep wrapped around each other. Two people who had been alone in the world and found their way to each other through chance and courage and nightly walks under the North Dakota sky. Years continued to pass, as they always do. Daniel turned 60, then 65, still riding out every morning to check on the cattle and the land, though he let Thomas handle more and more of the day-to-day operations. Katherine turned 58 and felt it in her bones, the long years of hard work catching up to her, but she would not trade a single moment. One evening in early autumn, when the air was crisp and the leaves were turning, Katherine stood on her porch watching the sunset. Daniel came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist and rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," she said. "The train cars. That first night you waited for me. How terrified I was to hope for anything better. How you changed everything just by being stubborn enough to show up." "Best decision I ever made," Daniel murmured. "Mine too. Letting you walk me home." They stood that way for a long time, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and red. Around them, their ranch hummed with life. Cattle lowed in the distance. Horses moved in the corrals. Somewhere in the house, a grandchild laughed. "We built a good life," Katherine said. "We built a great life," Daniel corrected. "And we are not done yet." He was right. They had years left together. Years of sunsets and grandchildren and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Years of anniversary walks and Sunday dinners and nights spent wrapped around each other, grateful for every moment. But even more than that, they had something that had started with 5 simple words spoken on a train platform in 1882. Words that had changed 2 lonely people into a family. Words that had built a home and a legacy. "Let me walk you home." And Katherine, who had been walking alone for so long, had finally said yes. The Owens Ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, eventually expanding to over 1,000 acres. Samuel's agricultural techniques increased their yields, and Emma's husband Robert became the most sought-after veterinarian in 3 counties. Katherine and Daniel's grandchildren grew up riding horses and mending fences and learning the value of hard work, just as their parents had. On their 40th anniversary, the family threw them a party that half of Bismarck attended. The town had grown too, expanding from a frontier outpost into a proper city, But the old-timers still remembered the young woman who had cleaned train cars and the cowboy who had waited for her every night. Daniel gave a rare speech that evening, standing in the parlor they had built with their own hands, surrounded by everyone they loved. 40 years ago, I saw a woman who needed help and I offered it. But the truth is, she saved me. Katherine gave me a home, a family, a reason to stop running and start living. Everything you see around you, everything we have built, started because a lonely cowboy was brave enough to offer to walk a lonely woman home, and she was brave enough to let him. Katherine stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, and when everyone raised their glasses to toast them, she felt the weight of every blessing, every challenge, every single beautiful moment that had brought them to this place. To Katherine and Daniel, Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion, who taught us all what love really looks like. To Katherine and Daniel, the room echoed. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Daniel took Katherine's hand and led her outside. The moon was full, just as it had been on so many nights over the past 40 years, and the prairie stretched away in every direction, silver and endless. "Let me walk you home," he said, just as he had said 1,000 times before. And Katherine, just as she had done 1,000 times before, took his arm and let him lead her around the property they had built together, past the barns and the corrals, and the houses where their children slept with their own families. When they reached their front door, she turned to face him, this man who had waited for her, who had seen her when no one else did, who had loved her with a steadiness that had never wavered. "Take me home, Daniel," she said softly. He kissed her there in the moonlight, and they went inside together, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life full of light. Daniel lived to be 73, dying peacefully in his sleep one winter night with Katherine beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart shattered, she was grateful they had been given so much time. They had loved deeply and well, and they had created something that would last long after they were gone. Katherine lived another 5 years, watching her grandchildren have children of their own, seeing the Owens ranch continue to thrive under Thomas's careful stewardship. She never remarried, never wanted to. Daniel had been her once-in-a-lifetime love, and she was content to carry his memory with her until they could be together again. On the last night of her life, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Katherine told them the story one final time. The story of a young woman who cleaned train cars and a cowboy who waited for her. The story of 5 simple words that changed everything. "Let me walk you home," she whispered as her eyes closed for the last time. "Yes, Daniel, take me home." She was buried beside him on the hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones side by side, facing the sunset they had watched together for so many years. And though they were gone, their legacy remained. The Owens Ranch still stands today, run by their great-great-grandchildren, a testament to 2 lonely people who found each other in frontier North Dakota and built something that would last forever. Because love, real love, the kind that starts with a simple offer and grows into a lifetime, never truly ends. It echoes down through generations, in the stories families tell and the values they hold and the land they tend. It lives on in every sunset watched from that porch, in every anniversary celebrated, in every time someone offers help to a stranger, and that stranger is brave enough to accept. Katherine and Daniel's story began on a train platform in Bismarck in 1882, but it has never really ended. It continues in every act of kindness, every stubborn gesture of love, every time someone sees another person who feels invisible and says in whatever way they can, "Let me walk you home." And that, after all, is what matters most. Not the grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the simple, steady choice to show up for someone, night after night, year after year, until those nightly walks become a lifetime and that lifetime becomes a legacy. The train cars in Bismarck are long gone, replaced by modern transportation. The boarding house where Katherine once rented a room was torn down decades ago to make way for a bank. But the Owens Ranch remains, a living memorial to two people who loved each other with a quiet, powerful devotion that changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. On clear autumn evenings, when the sun sets over the North Dakota prairie in shades of gold and crimson, locals say you can sometimes see two figures walking together on the hill where the original ranch house stood, hand in hand, heading home. It is just a story, of course, the kind of romantic legend that small towns love to tell. But the descendants of Katherine and Daniel like to think it is true, that somewhere beyond this world, their great-great-grandparents are still taking their nightly walk, still showing up for each other, still proving that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every single day. And on the gate of the Owens Ranch, beneath the family name weathered by over a century of North Dakota seasons, someone long ago carved 5 words that remain visible even now, a reminder of how everything began. Let me walk you home. 5 simple words. One extraordinary legacy. A love story that started on a train platform and never really ended, because the best love stories never do. They just keep going, generation after generation. Proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is offer help to a stranger, and the bravest thing a stranger can do is say yes. Katherine Keller had been alone in the world, scrubbing train cars and dreaming of nothing because dreaming hurt too much. Daniel Owens had been drifting through life, afraid to put down roots because roots could be torn up. Together, they became something neither could have been alone: a family, a legacy, a love that outlasted them both and continues even now. That is the power of showing up, of being seen, of 5 words spoken with sincerity on a cold platform in 1882. Of a woman brave enough to accept help, and a man patient enough to offer it without expecting anything in return. Their story is proof that happy endings are real, that love can bloom in the hardest circumstances, and that sometimes the most extraordinary lives start with the simplest gestures. A cowboy waiting on a platform, a woman with a bucket and exhausted hope. 5 words that changed everything. Let me walk you home. Yes, the beginning of forever.